Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3901, The Cutoff of Energy. Buzz. The downgrader was born anew within the black light. The symbolic 6 pairs of compound eyes were set ablaze by a striking purple light that flickered from time to time, which represented his confusion. When he regained his senses, he realized that the world had become nothing like he imagined it would be. From the highest grade world all the way to this low grade world, the only worthy adversary he had that matched his standard of strength was Clarence. Then where did these two come from? I don't care how powerful you are. It doesn't change the fact that you're destined to get destroyed to the point of oblivion. The downgrader scorned resentfully as his body remained camouflaged under the black light. As the battle between the evil god and Zen raged on, the wall world continued to shake and expand rapidly. Within the short span of an hour, the wall world underwent an extreme expansion from the range of 10 provinces to the size equivalent to that of the source world. As time continued to pass by, the rate of expansion grew exponentially. Buzz. The evil god slowly grew weary with this form of hand-to-hand combat that ceased to reach a conclusive end. He suddenly retreated to a fair distance and soared into the sky as he leapt to an incredible height of about 100 million feet. As he continued to ascend, his mind was a cluster of countless thoughts rushing to be heard all at the same time. Suddenly, huge runes appeared at the top of the chaos, and 100,000 thunder dragons manifested in the form of energy started to rain down on Zen from those runes. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Each thunder dragon harnessed a formidable strength that was 10,000 times stronger than that of the ending needle. The energy aura that was released by these thunder dragons alone held the capability to destroy everything in the chaos. Zen's eyes narrowed as they fell on the approaching calamity. He prepared himself and gave his hand a slight wave in the direction of the fairy palace. Upon this gesture, a formidable shield was constructed around the fairy palace. Without this shield, the fairy palace would have been rendered vulnerable and eventually perished if it were enveloped by the dominating aura of energy. After all the preparations were done, Zen extended his finger towards the top of the chaos. Annihilation Coke. Since the evil god had utilized the creation coke to inject vitality into these thunder dragons, Zen had used the annihilation coke to lay waste to them. Through the annihilation coke, he constructed countless gray needles that directed themselves towards the thunder dragons. Each needle was the size of a thumb, and they were no different from the ones used for the purpose of sewing. However, the power contained within these needles was on par with that possessed by the thunder dragons. Once these needles pierced through the bodies of the thunder dragons, they would perish in an instant. With Zen's technique, even the threatening thunder dragons were vulnerable as though they were insignificant obstructions in his path. Weak attacks like these are no match for me. The only way we can counter the downgrade is for you to return to my body voluntarily. Otherwise, we'll all die here, together with all the worlds, and there will be no chance to reverse the situation. Zen spoke in a hushed voice, trying to persuade the evil god. Although Zen said those words to the evil god alone, his voice echoed throughout the chaos and was audible to everyone in it. Naturally, the people present in the fairy palace and those on the black ship could hear him clearly as though he was speaking to them in person. What you have is an opportunity, and what you'll give up will turn into regret. With evil god's hot-headed personality, how could he just give up and let go of this opportunity that lay there in front of him? He scoffed at Zen's words as more thunder dragons descended from the runes and marked Zen as their target. Zen stood in his spot and constructed just as many needles to counter the incoming thunder dragons, eventually terminating them upon contact. The repetitive battle of creation and destruction continued on for a steady period. When Zen kept on releasing the embroidery needles time and again, he felt a strange sensation take over his existence. His eyes flashed as though something was revealed to him. After communicating briefly with Clarence, he changed his course of direction and moved to a different part of the chaos. Where do you think you're going? Don't tell me you're trying to escape. The evil god stood stunned at Zen's sudden change of action. Although he didn't quite understand what was going on in Zen's mind, he pursued him on instinct. As he chased after Zen, his body moved at an untraceable speed, trying to keep up with him. He didn't stop till he reached the edge of the chaos. Just as Zen stopped in his tracks, he turned to face the evil god and leaned his back against the inner wall of the chaos. The expression he wore on his face was strangely calm as he kept his gaze fixated on his opponent. "It's pointless to try and run away from me. You can't escape this place," the evil god sneered as a spiteful smirk stretched across his face. "I only lead you here to finish you off once and for all," Zen replied, maintaining his calm composure. As these words escaped Zen's mouth, the evil god let out a mocking laugh before he glanced at Zen with intrigued eyes. "Finish me off? How interesting. I'm dying to know what kind of method you'll use this time to manage that." Previously, Zen had used the method of illusion to devour the evil god, but it ended in failure. Since the evil god was familiar with it, it could not be used a second time. They were on the same level when it came to strength and methods, so no matter what they used, the other could easily neutralize it without a hitch. "I'll show you right now." With a single wave of Zen's hand, all the energy lying dormant in the void was extracted in one fell swoop. Masses of energy currents were now under the direct control of Zen. These energy currents manifested themselves into vicious golden dragons that charged their way to surround the evil god from all directions. These golden dragons were inexplicably large in size, with their number reaching up to 1,000,000. "So you plan to use the creation coke to kill me? How pathetic." With a scornful expression painted across his face, the evil god prepared himself to use the annihilation coke to counter the forthcoming attack. The confrontation between the two continued. However, during this round, their roles were reversed. Zen was the one on the offense while the evil god was pitted against him in defense. Just as the evil god proceeded to use the annihilation coke, his demeanor underwent a drastic switch. "What's going on?" the evil god roared in confusion as he stared his hands down before glancing in Zen's direction. Meanwhile, Zen smirked as he tilted his head and watched the evil god's frantic state with amusement. Back then, when Zen was preoccupied with crafting embroidery needles of the annihilation coke to clash against the evil god's thunder dragons, he noticed some tiny holes in the energy. Apparently, the energy existed in two forms, invisible and visible. The visible energy consisted of energy bodies like the thunder dragons and the embroidery needles, as well as all the solidified materials of energy. On the contrary, the invisible energy existed in the void, which could be referred to as dark energy. The dark energy flowed in abundance quietly along with the void like water. When the evil god used the creation coke without pause to create the thunder dragons, he had exhausted the dark energy in the area to a certain extent. As a result, an imbalance of energy distribution formed around this area. Therefore, the surrounding energy was pulled towards here to cover up for the insufficiency. But the dark energy constantly flowed at a certain speed. When the speed of the flow wasn't fast enough, a zone devoid of energy would form in the energy depression momentarily. This place was the real void, where even the dark energy ceased to exist. Although such a hole only remained in existence for a short while and would later be evened out by the dark energy in the surroundings, it provided Zen with an opportunity to drive the evil god into a corner. Zen had consumed the maximum amount of energy present in the surroundings and created 1,000,000 golden dragons. He didn't intend to kill the evil god with these dragons, but he only wanted him to fall into an area without energy, which would then incapacitate him. Within the boundaries of this void zone, there was no dark energy for the evil god to use, and the source of the dark energy was completely cut off, rendering him powerless. Even if the evil god couldn't make use of the external energy, he still had high reserves of energy stored away in his body. As soon as he realized something was wrong, he immediately employed the spatial transference. Buzz. As a result, the figure of the evil god began to blur out. Just as he was about to escape from this area, a stable space appeared where he stood. Bang! Caught off guard from its sudden appearance, he crashed into the square space, causing his body to stagger back a few steps. The spatial transference failed as he was interrupted midway. Damn it! Once again, the evil god roared as he felt his growing anxiety consume his body and cloud his judgments. Without wasting another moment, he gritted his teeth and employed all of his energy to use the spatial transference a second time. Boom! The limited strength he had left in him was insufficient to shake the square space. Don't even try, as no amount of energy will break you out of there. You won't be able to move from here, Zen said as he slowly descended towards the evil god with his arms crossed above his chest. Taking advantage of the flowing energy to deal with the evil god was a technique even Clarence couldn't think of, but it proved to be effective in the end. The evil god hung his head loosely from his neck as a shadow hovered over his face and hid his expressions. He remained silent for a while as he took his time to process the situation. Suddenly, he raised his head, and a mischievous smile stretched across his face as he laughed while staring Zen dead in the eye. Ha ha ha, you got me. I'll admit that it is pretty unexpected of you to pull a method like that. You almost managed to defeat me. You've always been the only person I admire for as long as I can remember. However, unfortunately. What do you mean? Zen retorted immediately to ask what he meant. Unfortunately for you, I lost a finger. The evil god said with his signature smile overflowing with malice. He raised his hand that was missing his index finger and waved it near Zen's face mockingly. Immediately after, his body collapsed on its own. Meanwhile, in another void of the chaos, an index finger rapidly regenerated and slowly formed human features. Within a few moments, it grew from a finger to a hand, an arm, a body, a head until it evolved into a complete human being with all limbs attached. Another perfect evil god was reborn. Chapter 3902, Retreat. He had been chasing after Zen all this time. But just now, he sensed that something was wrong. Needless to say, his intuition had always been right on the mark. However, he was not entirely sure what kind of finishing move Zen would employ. During the spatial transference, he secretly broke a finger and threw it into the void. This small action was the one that saved his life. Soon after, there was a loud buzzing sound. Just a short distance from him, the space began to ripple like water. Little by little, Zen emerged from the ripples. He was frowning and his aura was a bit gloomy. He did not have that much time left. Seeing how pressured Zen was, the evil god grinned. It will take a lot more than that for you to kill me. All I want is for you to return into my inner world, Zen replied in a slow and deep voice. Hearing this, the evil god responded, instead of using that powerful skill on me, why don't you just use that on the downgrader? If he loses energy, then the wall world might stop expanding. However, Zen shook his head. It doesn't actually need energy to proceed with the downgrading, he said gravely. Previously, he asked Clarence that very same question. The latter told him that downgrading could not be stopped no matter what. And the reason was that it was the embodiment of the rules. Therefore, it had nothing to do with energy. So, do you still want to continue our fight? The evil god looked him straight in the eyes. With an impassive expression, Zen answered, if that's your wish, then so be it. Once again, the endless energy began to flow all around them. Both of them had the ability to cut the energy flow. Each of them was trying to throw the other into the energy hole. However, both of them were well versed with the principle involved. Hence, they could both avoid it. Most importantly, they were aware of the threat the energy hole held. The only thing they needed to do was detach some parts of their bodies while the other person was distracted. And quietly, they would place them in every corner of the chaos. As soon as the evil god removed the restriction field, both of them lost the ability to know everything. Therefore, it was very difficult for them to notice these insignificant broken body parts scattered everywhere. How could they be killed? However, this battle of wits did not last long. The wall world had already expanded to the size of 100 source worlds in just another 5 minutes. 15 minutes passed and it had grown to 1/10 of the size of the entire chaos. At the 25-minute mark, it was already occupying 1/3 of the chaos. It was being downgraded at such an incredibly accelerated speed. It was way beyond the evil gods and Zen's expectations. Meanwhile, Fuxi was severely intoxicated in the fairy palace. With his cultivation base, it was actually impossible for him to get drunk. He deliberately let himself fall into this state. The snake goddess, Rocher, Kincaid, and the others were paying close attention to the chaos. The movements caused by Zen and the evil god's battle were far too great. Even though they were on the other end of the chaos, they could still feel the shock waves. If it weren't for the shields of the fairy palace and the black ship, the people inside would have died thousands of times. Hey, everyone, look, can you see? What on earth is that over there? Someone suddenly pointed to the west. Therefore, everyone looked towards the direction he was pointing. And there, they saw a blue arc. It was approaching at an incredible speed. The wall world was supposed to be completely transparent. It was almost like a chunk of ice without any color. In addition to that, it would only manifest a strange shape if something was pressed onto it. When the third-grade world was downgraded into the wall world, it would tear the space apart and crush everything. That was why everyone could see this blue arc. It was the light being released as the space was broken. It's the wall world. It's unbelievably fast. The snake goddess couldn't keep the astonishment in her voice. Zen had once reminded them that the world was undergoing an irreversible downgrading process. But during that time, the downgraded area was still very small. They always thought that it would take a long time before this happened. Obviously, they did not expect that its speed would be like this. So, the moment is finally here. We have nowhere else to escape to. Fuxi was leaning against the wall. He was still very much intoxicated. The snake goddess frowned as she stretched out her hand and touched Fuxi on the arm. His drunkenness dissipated right away. Even if they couldn't do anything else to change the situation, she didn't want to hear him say something so depressing. Meanwhile, the blue arc was getting even closer to them. From 10 million miles away, it was down to 5 million miles. After that, it was only a million miles away. With the current speed at which this arc moved, it would only take a blink of an eye for it to cross a million miles. Everyone, retreat. At that moment, they all heard Zen's voice echoing throughout the space. With that, the fairy palace began to move away. It flew eastward and maintained a certain distance from the blue arc. Not far from the fairy palace, the black ship did exactly the same. The Grand Master of Heaven and the others also noticed the blue arc that was rapidly closing in on their location. The former captain immediately took control of the black ship and flew towards the east. However, it seemed like it was too late. Just as the wall world was about to hit the black ship, the evil god suddenly appeared on its deck. After that, the black ship's speed increased significantly. It was able to get away from the wall world. Based on the speed at which the wall world is currently expanding, we only have about 5 minutes left, Zen informed everyone. To put it simply, we can only live for 5 more minutes. Rocher couldn't help but give in to despair. However, Zen shook his head. No, I will take you out of the chaos to prevent you from being downgraded, he said calmly. How much longer can we hide, Zen? Mike seemed eager to ask. Zen calculated the amount of time they had. In all honesty, he said, I'm afraid it won't be too long. I'm guessing we'll only have 6 to 8 hours left. The abstruse energy world was infinitely larger than the entire chaos. Unfortunately, the wall world was expanding at such a rapid pace. No matter how huge the world was, it would be devoured and downgraded within a short period of time. When the others heard this answer, their hearts tightened for a bit. Then, it was followed by a sense of peace. A while ago, they were extremely anxious about how much longer they could live. So now that they had gotten an estimate, the last bit of uneasiness had disappeared. As soon as they knew how much time they still had, they immediately accepted and made peace with it. Master Kincaid will die much earlier, Zen said as he looked sadly at Kincaid. After the chaos was downgraded, the other shore would no longer exist. Therefore, the coordinates of Kincaid on the other shore would also be downgraded. He would be gone forever as a treacherous being. On the other hand, Hilario and Dorothy were much luckier. They were living people and didn't have coordinates. They only had to rely on the descending rings to descend from the other shore. Furthermore, Zen would supply the energy for the descending rings. When Kincaid heard Zen's prediction, he still looked very calm. He turned to Dorothy and tucked her hair behind her ear. I'm sorry, dear, I'll be going first. Dorothy sobbed as she hugged Kincaid. Father. Her eyes were filled with tears. She couldn't believe this was the end for her father. Oh, my dearest, don't worry, I'll follow you right away. Itzel's face was full of fear. Nevertheless, she was determined to do so. Kincaid merely nodded and smiled. There was no trace of sorrow on his face. He considered this as an acceptable ending for his existence. Everyone, let's drink. Fuxi took out his wine pot and held it high. They were doomed one way or another. So all they could do now was to drink and celebrate the lives they led. Rocher was a person who didn't drink alcohol. But when he heard that, he suddenly stood up and walked towards Fuxi. He took the wine pot and drank a big gulp of wine. After that, he silently retreated to one side and sat down cross-legged. Hilario also walked over and drank from the wine pot. Afterward, Bromley, Mike, and the others took turns drinking the wine. Soon after, 5 minutes had already passed. The wall world had already expanded all the way to the edge of the chaos. The fairy palace was also at the edge. With that, Zen raised his hand and struck at the inner wall of the chaos. They heard a loud booming sound as he did this. Subsequently, a large hole appeared on the inner wall of the chaos. The fairy palace went straight into the hole and entered the abstruse energy world. Most of the people in the fairy palace felt dazed. All they could see were countless light dots in front of them. They couldn't make out anything in their surroundings. One by one, Zen patted them lightly to help them with the soul reincarnation. As a result, they were now able to perceive the abstruse energy world clearly in front of them. Chapter 3903, An Old Friend. While the group of people from the chaos had smoothly adapted to the environment of the abstruse energy world, the situation for the creatures from the 4th grade world was completely different. Kincaid stared at everything around him as tears started to swell in his eyes. The glorious scenes of the four spirit sect in the past kept reappearing in his mind's eyes. As he let out a deep sigh, his body began to solidify. It gradually crumbled and eventually turned into dust. Just like what Zen said, after the chaos was downgraded, there was no way for the other shore to escape its fate. Although the human spirits of the bold conjecture house had controlled the passageway in order to hide at the highest point, it was only good to delay the inevitable for a few more moments. In the end, Itzel was able to grip the hands of the human spirit king tightly before he turned into a handful of dust. A surge of emotion became very visible in her eyes. She gently raised her trembling hand and spread out her palm, allowing the ashes to float and be carried by the wind. According to the rules, after Itzel and Hilario returned to the abstruse energy world, they would also be killed off by the power that was left behind by the downgrader. While they couldn't resist this power, it was just a piece of cake for Zen in his current state. Thus, when the destructive force rushed towards Itzel and Hilario, Zen released a light film that appeared above the fairy palace and easily resisted it. Then, Hilario asked with a bitter smile, "Zen, can we go to the four holy pillars? I really want to be there for the last time." The four holy pillars had been the base of operations of the four spirit sect. For countless times, Hilario had dreamed of returning to this place that he had considered as his home. Thus, before everything ended, he requested to see it one more time. Zen understood how everyone in the fairy palace felt and also wanted to help them realize whatever dreams they had left. Thus, he immediately agreed and said, "Of course." Whoosh! In an instant, the fairy palace sped up and flew towards the direction of the four pillars. Meanwhile, the black ship also rushed out of the chaos from the other side. Initially, the evil god didn't know about the soul reincarnation, thus he was a little confused the first time he entered the main world and was enveloped by the stars all over the sky. However, he was still able to react quickly as he controlled all of the energies. In an instant, he learned the soul reincarnation and immediately exerted it on himself, Edna, Shira, the Grand Master of Heaven, and the former captain of the ship. On the other hand, Duran's coordinates were left behind on the other shore. Although he had hidden them very well, it was still no use since the entire other shore was already downgraded. With that, he wasn't able to escape his doom. By the time that the Grand Master of Heaven and the others realized what was happening, Duran had already been reduced to ashes. "Darling, where are we going now?" Edna asked in a soft voice. "I don't know yet," the evil god answered in an emotionless tone. He was so upset at what was happening. It seemed that nothing turned out according to his plan. After the entire chaos was downgraded, the wall world continued to spread at an incredible speed. The forests, mountains, rivers, and even the secondary worlds were all devoured and squeezed into the wall world. Everything was turned into a picture of a complete disarray. Although the fourth grade world was relatively vast, it was still finite. There was no use hiding and running aimlessly. This made the evil god so frustrated. The situation was very pressing, and he still couldn't think of any solution. Right now, there was no point in fighting Zen, but he also didn't possess the power to kill the downgrader. As time passed, the expansion of the wall world was just growing rapidly, and it was not reversible. Everything seemed to point out that this was already a dead end. No, there must be a way. I just need to think and find it. As someone who had a lot of pride, the evil god refused to give up. He had already sacrificed and suffered a lot, so there was no way that he would just surrender without doing anything. While the evil god paced back and forth on the deck of the black ship, his hand suddenly felt a cold sensation. As the evil god turned, he saw that it was Edna who held her by the hand, standing and smiling before him. "Don't worry too much. I've never seen you like this before, not even when you faced the creator. That's because Zen still has a flaw. He's a soft-hearted idiot and I know that I could always seize the opportunity to bring him down. But, what's happening right now is different. I can't find any solution to our situation," the evil god said with a frown. He was like a trapped beast in a cage, looking restless and depressed. Shira, the former captain and the Grand Master of Heaven beside didn't even dare to speak. Edna remained calm as she said, "Not every problem could be solved. Maybe it's time to accept that the downgrade is really unavoidable." While Edna spoke, the evil god's brain was still racing rapidly. He was calculating and strategizing all kinds of plans. However, when he heard the last part of what she said, his eyes suddenly widened, and his entire body froze. "It's unavoidable." The evil god lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and clenched his fists. "We can just accept the situation," Edna said with a faint smile. She just didn't want to see the evil god distressed. In her mind, if they only had a few hours left to exist, she hoped that they could just spend their remaining time happily. But I can't. The evil god turned and stared at her with an indignant look in his eyes. Upon seeing the evil god like this, Edna couldn't help but bite her lips. She didn't utter another word and just let out a sigh. In her mind, they were already in a situation that wouldn't matter whether they accepted their death or not. Meanwhile, the wall world was still expanding rapidly throughout the main world. Due to its astonishing speed, the creatures living in the main world could only see an azure arc. Before they could make any scream or realize what was going to hit them, they were already pressed into the wall world, becoming a mass of flesh and blood that seemed like a bloody piece of abstract art. All of the villages, tribes, and even cities that were born just recently could not escape the fate of being devoured. In just 2 hours, the wall world had already downgraded 1/10 of the main world. At the same time, the 4 pillars were still standing on the ground. The 4 time chains connected each of them, and at the center was the eternal divine courtyard. Whoosh! The huge fairy palace slowly went past the 4 pillars and approached the eternal divine courtyard. Then, Hilario quickly jumped out of the fairy palace and stood in the middle of the courtyard with extreme excitement. What a pity, I'm the only one who was able to come back. All of my comrades would have no chance to see it again. As he remembered that all of the members of the Bold Conjecture House had already been annihilated within the wall world, he felt very bitter. I think they'll be glad knowing that at least you were able to return, Zen said as he stood beside him. Maybe you're right, it's just a shame that I wouldn't be able to stay here for long. Zen then turned his head and looked into the distance. He saw a thin blue line, which was like a forest fire that was steadily spreading. We can still stay for another hour, Zen said as he estimated the speed of the downgrade. I see, I'll be a little selfish and grab it then, Hilario replied with a bitter smile. After an hour, the wall world had already downgraded about 9/10 of the entire area of the main world. Then, the fairy palace began to rise vertically. Zen's ultimate goal right now was to retreat into the deep space. Previously, Jeffrey had been through the transmission array at the top of the eternal divine courtyard to get to the deep space. However, there was no need for Zen to do this right now. With his current ability, he could just directly fly up while taking the entire fairy palace. After entering the deep space, Zen had once again released the soul reincarnation to the people within the fairy palace, so that they could adapt to the environment of the 5th grade world. Then, Jeffrey guided them towards the southwest of the Sky Wheel City. Finally, the fairy palace stopped in front of a huge piece of land. The arrival of the fairy palace immediately attracted the attention of the members of the elemental race below. They bellowed and led a white-haired old human spirit outside to greet them. It was none other than Elder Shui. Seeing the sudden appearance of the fairy palace, he already had the hunch of who had arrived. Soon, several figures rushed out of the fairy palace. Elder Shui recognized some of them, one of whom was Jeffrey. Immediately after, he saw another familiar figure. Master Hilario, Elder Shui exclaimed with a trembling voice. Hilario then strode forward and supported Elder Shui with his hands. I'm so ashamed. These were his first words as he saw Elder Shui. Back then, Hilario had strongly objected to the idea of going to the deep space because of the heated debate over the route. However, Elder Shui still stubbornly did what he wanted and proved that his choice was the right one. Chapter 3904, No Way to Go. After Elder Shui sent Jeffrey away, he had been very upset all this time. Unfortunately, he couldn't return to the main world, which meant he had no chance to meet his friends again. However, though Elder Shui hoped that Jeffrey would bring someone here, he did not expect that it would be so soon. We were both loyal to the Four Spirit sect, but we had a disagreement. Is that something to be ashamed of? Elder Shui asked as he waved his hand. A bitter smile spread across Hilario's face. It was not a mere disagreement. Master Kincaid and I chose a path that was a dead end, and this led to the destruction of the Four Spirit sect. He looked down at his feet. How can I just forget this? Let bygones be bygones. As Elder Shui spoke, he put an arm around Hilario and looked at the people behind him. Where is our king? Hilario's soft smile turned into a frown once again. He passed away. How is that even possible? Elder Shui asked as his body stiffened. Because Jeffrey successfully brought these people to the deep space, everything should have gone smoothly. As a treacherous being, Kincaid had no flaws except for his coordinates. Killing him would be no easy task. Hilario sighed and did not speak a word. What happened? Elder Shui stepped back as he sensed something had gone wrong. At the same time, Zen moved forward and cupped his hands before Elder Shui. Elder Shui, I'm Zen Luo. Jeffrey is my son. Though Elder Shui had never seen Zen, he had learned much about him through Jeffrey. It was Zen he'd chosen for the plan and for fusing with the ancestry-level bloodline. Sir, you've given me a great fortune but I still failed in the end, Zen said as he still looked down in defeat. He shook his head in shame, not wanting to make any eye contact with Elder Shui. This was the first time they met each other. Standing before him was the man who changed his life. Since the page had been burnt, Zen's fate had forever been linked to the entire world. The person responsible for this was Elder Shui, but unfortunately, Elder Shui's plan never followed through. Meanwhile, Elder Shui stretched out his hands and placed them on Zen's head. As the saying goes, man proposes and fate disposes. You have gone through great trials to inherit the ancestry-level bloodline and save Master Kincaid. You have not failed, son. But the world is being destroyed, Zen said with a bitter smile. He then told Elder Shui what happened after Jeffrey brought back the heavenly ring staff, from the main world to the chaos, and from the end to the downgrading. Once he finished, he fixed his stance and with a calm expression said, "This is all my fault. I'm not here to visit you. In all honesty, I led everyone to escape here." Elder Shui's eyes widened as he heard Zen's confession. However, he almost immediately relaxed and a smile followed after. The downgrading cannot be stopped. This is the fate of all living beings. Why must you put it all on yourself? Right, Hilario echoed from behind. You were not defeated by the downgrading but by the rules. We have no choice but to accept it. As they discussed, a few members of the elemental race ran over. They pointed towards one direction and muttered all at the same time in a panic. As Elder Shui tried to understand what was going on, he looked in the direction they pointed at. Just then, a magnificent blue arc slowly shot up into the sky from the bottom of the space, and massive chunks of rocks eroded as it passed. That is the expanding wall world? Asked Elder Shui. Zen looked at it then turned to him. Yes, the wall world is about to expand to this place. Elder Shui, I would like to ask you to enter the fairy palace and go with us. To his surprise, Elder Shui shook his head and said, "You may leave. I'll stay here." Elder Shui, please go with us. You'll be downgraded if you stay here, Jeffrey couldn't help but chip in. Elder Shui smiled and looked at Jeffrey with kind eyes. Good boy, I have lived many years. It means nothing to me to have more hours or less. Jeffrey scratched his head. I guess you're right. No one even attempted to persuade Elder Shui. They all knew that they'd come to a dead end. In the fairy palace, all of the people had got rid of their lifespan shackles long ago, but they couldn't seem to shake the shackles of the world. They returned to the fairy palace and set off on their journey once again. After the fairy palace left, Elder Shui spoke to the members of the elemental race. He asked them to hold a sacrificial ceremony and invited them all to attend. The members of the elemental race looked to Elder Shui as a precious, symbolic figure. At the moment they heard his words, they rushed to prepare the ceremony. Not knowing what it was for, they blindly followed his orders merely because he was Elder Shui. Once the ceremony was prepped and all the members were gathered together, Elder Shui chanted in their language, "The gate of the heaven is coming soon. It will guide us to the pure land of joy, where there is no pain or dispute, and all living creatures are equal." As they heard his words, the creatures gasped and flailed in joy. "Where is the gate of the heaven?" asked one of them. "That's it," Elder Shui exclaimed, pointing to the distance. As if on cue, the blue arc arrived at tremendous speed. The members of the elemental race were so immersed in the mesmerizing scenery Elder Shui described that it took them a while to realize what came towards them. Before they knew it, they were all mutilated. Crack, crack, crack. Once the wall world expanded to the deep space, its speed increased even more. A huge part of the ground was destroyed as the Sky Wheel City began to be downgraded. Within only a few minutes, the entire city was completely downgraded. Afterwards, the broken relics and the ring-shaped sun that hung in the sky of the deep space were downgraded as well. If one looked from afar, the deep space resembled a flat cone. Though the downgrader broke many of its parts when it was downgraded before, not much of its cone-like structure had changed. Meanwhile, the fairy palace continued to rise along the axis of the cone. When it reached its peak, it abruptly stopped. "We can't seem to go up any further," said Zen. Everyone looked up to the sky as if on command. Each and every world had a boundary, and the boundary of the deep space was hovering about 80 feet above them. It floated there like a translucent layer of gray soil. This was as far as they could go. "Dad, what do you think is outside the deep space?" Jeffrey asked curiously. "My son, even Clarence can't seem to answer that," replied Zen with a smile and a nudge to his son's head. "Then why don't you try to break it?" Jeffrey asked again, but this time, with his fists clenched. He also knew that this was almost impossible to do, but he was convinced that they should have a try. I guess we can have a go. But just as Zen finished speaking, a black light rapidly rose from below and then slowed down its pace as it neared the fairy palace. It was the black ship controlled by the evil god. This was not a surprise to any of them, for the evil god was unfamiliar with the main world and the deep space. He moved around aimlessly as he was chased by the wall world, and finally, he found himself at the top of the deep space just like everybody else. Chapter 3905, The Beginning of the Wall World. The black ship slowed down to a stop next to the fairy palace. The evil god and Zen exchanged a quick glance, their eyes roaming vigilantly. Despite being cornered, neither of them intended to give up. Humph, the evil god snorted. Jumping up from the bow, he landed to the side of the gray soil. His line of thinking was similar to Jeffrey's. If he couldn't stop the downgrading, the best thing he could do was break past the barrier of the world and escape. Zen calmly watched the evil god from the fairy palace. He was keenly aware that the gray soil was indestructible. Since the evil god wanted to make a move first, he figured there would be no harm in trying. Whoosh! Raising his fist in the air, the evil god threw a mighty punch at the surface of the gray soil. Bang! A dull sound rang out upon the punch's impact. When the dust cleared, they found a fist-shaped mark was made on the soft gray soil. It seemed that all of the energy contained within the punch had been completely absorbed by the gray soil. The evil god couldn't hide his surprise. Confusedly, he eyed the small fist mark. How could such ordinary soil contain that much power? He took a step back. The surface of his body began to glow as he channeled all the energy in the void to pour into his body. In a matter of seconds, he looked like a human-shaped body of energy. Erring on the side of caution, Zen distanced the fairy palace away from the evil god. He wanted to avoid falling into the line of fire. At the moment, the evil god had no intention of attacking Zen. After absorbing a considerable amount of energy, he launched himself into the gray soil, colliding into it violently. Bang! The sound of the collision was much louder than the previous one, echoing throughout the space. Under the impact of such a powerful blow, the gray soil once again caved in, but when the evil god recovered, he found that only a shallow indentation was made on the gray soil. As Zen watched, his eyes narrowed slightly. The gray soil, did it absorb all that energy? The rule of infinite energy was that whenever energy in the void was used, it would simply return back to the void. However, this gray soil had actually absorbed all the energy, which meant that a portion of energy in the world was lost. The expression on the evil god's face was the same as that on Zen's. He too was aware of the rule of infinite energy. And yet, the gray soil was breaking that very rule. It's not what you think. Clarence's voice suddenly echoed in Zen's mind. The gray soil can indeed absorb energy, but after a while, it will spit it out again. Is there no limit to the energy that can be absorbed by the gray soil? Zen asked incredulously. Remember I said that there was a time I used up 99% of the energy to launch an attack in the 8th grade world. I was attacking the gray soil, Clarence started to say. What happened then? Zen asked eagerly. Although he could also manipulate energy infinitely now, 99% of the energy in the whole world was still very terrifying. A huge pit with a depth of more than 10 miles was created. However, I didn't see the upper limit of the gray soil. Later, as the gray soil slowly repaired itself, the energy was gradually returned, Clarence answered calmly. Zen's eye twitched. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The shockingly huge impact of 99% of energy only caused a 10-mile deep crater. What exactly was this gray soil in front of him? After the second attempt failed, the evil god flared his nostrils, still unwilling to give up. Urging the black ship to move backwards, he also called out to Zen, retreat a little. He was planning to absorb more energy to launch yet another attack, but he didn't want Zen to misconstrue his actions. This time, however, Zen finally cut in. It's useless, he said. You mean the soil can't be broken? The evil god frowned. Zen nodded. Clarence once used 99% of the world's energy and caused a pit that ran for around 10 miles, but even he couldn't break it. The evil god didn't reply. Instead, he clenched his fists in deep frustration, causing the surrounding space to fluctuate. He had seen a lot of battles and hardships in his life, yet in the face of this seemingly unremarkable soil, he could do nothing. Bang! Distressed, the evil god slammed his fist into the gray soil once again. Falling onto his knees, the evil god succumbed to despair. Then, Edna quietly approached him from behind and wrapped her arms around him. Stop trying, she said softly. Go back to the ship and accompany me in our last moments. The evil god's eyes widened. We are about to die. Aren't you afraid of death? No, Edna smiled at her husband calmly. It's not a sad thing to die by your side. Upon hearing this, the evil god was moved. Instantly, all feelings of despair and regret vanished from his heart. While he still didn't want to resign himself to his fate, he decided it was time to compromise. He took Edna's delicate hand in his, and they both headed back to the ship. There, they found the Grand Master of Heaven, Shira, and the former captain blankly staring at the soil, quietly resigned to their fates. Even the people in the fairy palace began to bid each other goodbye. They all knew they were about to die, but in the face of death, they remained calm. However, despite being calm, they couldn't avoid the overwhelming feelings of sadness and regret sweeping over them. Zen's avatars said goodbye to Letitia, Margaret, Lavender, Aura, and the other women. Zen had informed them of the possible consequences before, so even Margaret held her head high when their fears were confirmed. For the next few moments, a hush fell over the fairy palace and the black ship as they quietly awaited their doom. In the distance, the blue arc rapidly expanded. Everything along the way, whether it was a huge monster or a speck of dust, whether it was flowing energy or solidified material, was quickly absorbed by the wall world. Zen counted backwards silently, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Splash! In the blink of an eye, the fairy palace and the black ship were crushed into countless pieces. Because Zen and the evil god were a lot more powerful, they lasted a little longer in the midst of the downgrading force. However, eventually, they too succumbed to it and were pressed into the wall world. Ha ha ha, the stellar world, the grand lower world, and the lower extreme world have all been downgraded. Now, I hereby announce the beginning of the wall world. Now, only the wisp of black light in the center and the downgrader within it maintained their original forms. Then, the black light also began to be downgraded, slowly sinking into the center of the wall world. The materials in the third grade world had been in a mess before this began, so when they were downgraded, they grew into an even bigger mess. But the black light was different. After the black light merged into the wall world, it transformed into a sphere, surrounded by ripples of energy of the same length and width. If one overlooked the wall world, they would find an exquisite black sun symbol. Of course, there was no one else in the world to overlook the wall world. After the black sun symbol shrank into oblivion, the downgrader emerged and slowly crawled onto the surface of the wall world. He looked very strange now, as if he were a monster made up of many fragments, just like the strange sculpture on the totem of an ancient race. Chapter 3906, The World with Lines. The downgrader crawled around for some distance, until he came across some white lines of varying lengths. Even though he was a downgrader, it was difficult for him to adapt to the form of the second grade world in such a short time. Even he was a little stunned to see these white lines. But soon, he realized that these white lines were the ice crystals released by the evil god before. These ice crystals still had the attribute of coldness, but after being downgraded, more abilities were unlocked. Now, 5 or 6 different types of energy could be released from the ice attribute. After all the worlds were downgraded to the second grade, the total area of the entire world was expanded by 30 billion times. Additionally, the number of the energy types has also increased. However, this world is too desolate. I don't think there will be any more creatures. The third grade world was called the lower extreme world, wherein the word, extreme, represented the limit of life. Supposedly, all living beings could survive if they were downgraded from the high-grade world. But that wasn't the case in the wall world. Although the area of the second-grade world had expanded to a terrifying extent, and the types of energy were also more abundant, this world no longer carried the conditions for living beings to survive. Thus, the creatures of the fourth-grade world wouldn't die when they entered the third-grade world, but the creatures of the third-grade world would be crushed to death when they entered the wall world. The downgrader sped up, crawling along the surface of the wall world. Turning his arm into the shape of a boat paddle, he tried to stand up properly to cover more distance as he crawled. As he did this, the downgrader noticed some red, pale yellow, white lines ahead of him. The red lines were blood, the pale yellow lines were flesh, and the white lines were bones. The 3 different lines were embedded together. These must have been traces from the battle between the evil god and Zen. After all, parts of their body were constantly devoured by the wall world during their hand-to-hand combat. After the downgrader passed by these floating multicolored lines, he stumbled upon another void. The entire chaos expanded 30 billion-fold, so the distance between the center of the chaos and the end of it had also increased by 30 billion times. However, the downgrader still managed to close this distance with ease. Buzz! Suddenly, a rogue piece of space circled the downgrader, sucking him into it. In a flash, the downgrader had left this void and entered the scope of the former main world. Here, the area was even wider. As aforementioned, after a world was completely downgraded, the space would expand by 30 billion times. Therefore, a mountain within the main world could contain an entire chaos. But when the main world was downgraded from a 4th grade space to a 2nd grade space, all of the spaces within it turned into the size of the wall world. This meant that it had expanded by 0.9 billion trillion times. After the downgrader entered the main world, he saw that the color of the lines became complicated. All kinds of long, short, green, brown and gray lines were interconnected. It was difficult to make out what the lines were previously, so the downgrader could only perceive their energy structures. Cautiously, he shuttled back and forth, searching to see if there were any living beings. After a new world unfurled, the creatures that appeared were only accessories in the process of downgrading. While his sole mission was to downgrade, killing these so-called accessories was a great pleasure for him. This kind of pleasure increased day by day, especially in the 3rd grade world. He even met human beings who were strong enough to defeat him, but in the end, he was always the one who emerged victorious. However, upon scouring the 2nd grade world, he was not used to these desolate-looking lines. Just as he was beginning to grow desperate, he suddenly came across a green line moving in front of him. "There are creatures," the downgrader exclaimed, his heart overjoyed. He excitedly rushed over towards the seemingly thousands of feet long green line. However, as he approached, he realized this green line was equivalent to a small worm less than an inch long in the 3rd grade world. Even so, the downgrader still approached it cautiously, fearing that he would accidentally destroy this green line. Since he couldn't use his spiritual sense, it was very difficult to communicate in the wall world. The only way to communicate was to manipulate the length of the lines and their colors. Theoretically, this kind of communication was possible, but it was unrealistic to expect a worm-like creature to learn this in so short a time. After observing it for a while, the downgrader found that the green line was still slowly wriggling in one direction. "It's so boring to watch a worm crawl," he said in disgust. The downgrader was a little depressed, but suddenly, Clarence crossed his mind. He surely must still be alive, he thought excitedly. Then, he abruptly flew in a certain direction, shattering the green line in front of him. If he did that in the 3rd grade world, it would be equivalent to crushing a worm with a single kick. Meanwhile, there was a slight movement in the void darkness. It was as if the fireworks swept across the night sky. "Wake up, Zen, wake up," this voice rang out in the depths of Zen's soul, but Zen didn't respond at all. He had fallen into a state of ignorance, so he no longer had any thoughts, no longer cared about external things, and had cut off all the ways of communication. Nothing mattered anymore. Zen didn't care about anything. But suddenly, he felt a little warm. Then, he saw the sun rising, bringing a dazzling light with it. The ray of light seemed to pierce right into his soul. The world that Zen perceived now was distorted and constantly changing, like a painting that was splashed with fresh ink. Then, Zen found himself within the paradise-like fairy palace, and joyful laughter rang out from the high wall. The young Salome was struggling to cross the threshold. When she did, she gave him a warm smile. "Wake up, father. Stop sleeping. I don't want to see you get lost," Salome exclaimed sweetly. She had a lovely smile, revealing 2 dimples on her cheeks, but it should be impossible for her to say these words. "Who are you?" Zen asked confusedly. Once Zen's attention was successfully caught, the smile on Salome's face disappeared, and she said seriously, "I'm Clarence. I've been calling you. Why didn't you answer me?" "I'm already dead," Zen said with some disgust, wrinkling his nose. "No, you're not," Clarence exclaimed in annoyance. Zen still shook his head, trying to resist. "Is this the illusion you created?" "Well, strictly speaking, this is my memory. I have all the memories that have extended from the perfect land to here. What you see is the reality I have built using my memories," Clarence explained. "A reality created by memories?" Zen echoed, in a daze. "Is this really not an illusion?" "To your cognition, this is the real world," Clarence replied cryptically. As Clarence was the master of the perfect land, his memories were very special. Everything in this world was preserved in his memories, which served like trillions of building blocks. He only needed to place the blocks according to the original positions in his memories, and then the reality would be constructed. Conversely, if he pushed the blocks down and disordered the memory positions, then the real world would be destroyed. "Then, can you let me stay here for the rest of eternity?" Zen asked sleepily. "Of course not," Clarence denied Zen firmly. Then, dark clouds gathered in the sky, and the winds began to howl. The indestructible fairy palace was shattered into countless pieces. Salome also dissolved into a small ball of light, which was the form that Clarence had always assumed when he revealed himself to others. Chapter 3907, The Battle on the Plain. The light ball slowly floated towards Zen and merged with his body once more. Clarence's voice rang from the depths of Zen's soul again. The reality I gave you is not enough. You have to create your own reality as well. Is there any difference? Zen asked in confusion. Of course there is. This could be what I pursue, and also the reason you were born, answered Clarence. For humans, drinking the first mouthful of milk to fill their empty stomachs after birth was the beginning of their journey to life. From there, they grew step by step in pursuing strength, wealth, love, power, and the desire for immortality. However, Clarence was born in a perfect land and had everything he needed within his reach. There was nothing worth pursuing to him in neither the higher grade worlds nor the lower grade worlds, which drove him to seek the truth instead. Why did the world exist? What was behind the world and all the things in it? No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the answers to these seemingly simple questions himself, let alone anyone else. Although Mastma was on par with him, Mastma had no interest in discussions such as these other than desperately downgrading the world. Most of the time, Clarence felt quite envious of Mastma. He only focused on the downgrading, giving it his full attention and refusing to think about anything else. While the world became downgraded little by little, Zen and the evil god were born as special existences. How could Clarence let go of these too easily? When Zen heard Clarence's words, he couldn't help feeling hopeless. He wanted to bring his family to a stable environment and stay in the fairy palace, but Clarence insisted on forcing him out. Can I really create my own reality? Zen asked hesitantly. Sure, I will help you, replied Clarence. Fine. Zen heaved out a sigh as he began to pull himself together. The reality that Clarence mentioned became the greatest motivation for him. He looked forward to meeting his family again. He did not intend to give up even though he only had a glimmer of hope to cling to. Two dots suddenly appeared in the wall world. Zen's eyeballs were slowly formed, followed by his whole head, body, and limbs. Because of the flat form, there was no need to follow the rules of humans in creation. A human body had no advantage in the wall world, but was, in fact, a burden. Clarence had initially advised Zen to create himself in the form of a beetle or a worm. With many sets of feet, wings, and eyes, he would certainly gain a great advantage in the wall world. He could observe better and even move faster. However, Zen just couldn't accept it. In the end, he still created a human figure but with a rough shape. After his body had been completed, his eyes began to perceive the light. What he saw were thin lines in varying colors. These thin lines are the only things I can see? Zen asked as he felt a slight discontent. Yes, you can only see the length and brightness of the thin lines, however, you can release your spiritual sense into these thin lines. In this way, you can infer their appearance, Clarence suggested. Zen tried to do what Clarence had just said. The spiritual sense could only spread along the surface of the wall world, but as it had been infused into the thin lines, Zen was able to see what was beyond them. However, everything in the deep space had been downgraded into a mess of various fragments. Even with his spiritual sense, it would still be difficult for him to make out the real shapes of these fragments. After he walked a short distance on the plain, he noticed a thin gray line. As usual, Zen released his spiritual sense, but the moment his spiritual sense was infused into the thin gray line, it vanished into thin air. It had actually been absorbed. This thin gray line, he was a little stunned, but he immediately came to a conclusion. This is the unbreakable gray soil. Has it also been downgraded? The gray soil has not and will not be downgraded. What you see is only a section line of it, said Clarence. The creatures in the lower grade worlds would never be able to see the complete appearance of the creatures in the higher grade worlds. If Zen had been born in the second grade wall world, he would always see only a thin gray line appearing to block the way. It would be impossible for him to even imagine what the gray soil was. Which world does the gray soil belong to anyway? Zen suddenly asked with his eyebrows furrowed. I don't know, Clarence replied. The gray soil had already gathered at the edge of the perfect land, and no matter how much the world downgraded, it would only stay the same and wouldn't be affected. As the two of them discussed the second grade world, two black lines suddenly appeared from the far ends, one from the left and the other from the right. They dashed very fast, closing in together and heading straight for Zen. That's a strong aura of energy, Zen exclaimed as he was shocked. Although he was not ready to fight in the wall world, he instinctively retreated as he felt the danger approaching and instantly pushed his spiritual sense forward. Through his spiritual sense, Zen quickly recognized the shape of the black lines. They formed a huge pair of black scissors, and as their blades chomped, they intended to cut down Zen. Zen, who was retreating at high speed, had escaped death. However, he saw black lines on his left, right, and back. He had already been trapped by the black scissors. Evil God, is that you? Zen used his spiritual sense to communicate in all directions. Since he wasn't dead, neither was the evil God. It must be the evil God who had launched such a powerful attack. The winner of the previous battle between the two of them could not be decided, so they had stopped fighting since then. Zen didn't have any idea why the evil God was coming after him again. Zen didn't get a response. The aura of the black lines was getting stronger and stronger. The scissors were also approaching at a higher speed. A thought flashed through Zen's mind, and a golden thread began to appear on the surface of his body. It was a golden ring that surrounded him. After the ring appeared, it quietly expanded outward, forming a much larger ring. If the evil God spied in the dark, he would have seen the golden thread instantly smash the scissors. Although the black scissors were undeniably sharp, they immediately crashed as they touched the golden ring, dispersing their big and small fragments in the air. Red lines appeared as soon as the scissors were destroyed. These red lines then moved towards Zen in spiraling motions. Zen released another golden thread. Wherever the golden thread passed, all the red lines were devoured without a trace. Evil God, your attacks are now useless. The energy in the second-grade wall world is more fragmented and therefore easier to crack. Do you hear me? Zen released his spiritual sense again to communicate widely. This time, he finally saw the evil God's figure. The evil God had 4 pairs of eyes on the wall world, and he could observe up to 4 directions around him. His body took a circular shape, from which numerous spikes emerged. He resembled a bug with a strange shape. So what? Since there's nothing to lose here, why don't we have a good fight? The evil God challenged him with his spiritual sense. It's true that we really do have nothing to lose, but we can still obtain, Zen replied. Obtain? Obtain what? The right to live in this shitty world? The evil God asked in an arrogant tone. He was also dissatisfied with the second-grade wall world. Nothing could be more boring than a world where only lines could be seen. Chapter 3908, The Last Downgrading. When the evil God was in the third-grade world, his state of mind had transformed. From being a troublemaker, he became a controller. After controlling the Black Ship, a province, and the whole source world, he began to respect order and even maintain order. However, when the chaos ended, his source world was destroyed. He lost everything he owned, including the Black Ship and his beloved wife. He was left all alone. Because of this, he began to hate the world again and wanted to destroy it even more. Because Zen was the only other living creature in the area, the evil God vented his anger on him. Swoosh! In an instant, a huge, long, and colorful line appeared. It was an energy plate, which looked about 10 billion miles in length. The energy plate was so gigantic that it looked like an ocean, which could easily drown Zen with its multicolored energy waves. Buzz! An octagon-shaped blue energy shield surrounded Zen, blocking the gigantic, powerful energy trying to attack him. While he was dealing with this, he tried to appeal to the evil God. He said, "What if we can bring back everything we had in the past?" "That's impossible," the evil God replied with frustration. The colorful energy began to change its hue. Several colors disappeared, leaving behind the red and blue colors. The red and blue energies melted into each other until they became one single color, purple. Although the ocean of purple energy looked beautiful, it was more destructive. It was destroying Zen's energy shield much more effectively. Thinking on his feet, Zen quickly changed his energy shield, blocking the purple energy. He was becoming more and more frustrated with the evil God's attacks, but he still tried to communicate with him. "No, I mean it. Clarence is the controller, which means he has all the memories. If the whole world is restarted, all realities will be realized. The energy and materials will be restored. Everything in the past will reappear." Zen screamed through the noise, doing his best to persuade the evil God. When he said this, the evil God began to listen, putting his attacks on Zen on hold. The purple energy calmed down, gently gathering around Zen. "Then who will make all of this reappear?" the evil God asked. "I will," Zen answered with no hesitation. "By devouring me?" "Yes." "No way," the evil God retorted. He never trusted Zen, and Zen never trusted him. When they were in the third-grade world, they could not put their distrust aside and reconcile their differences. The same happened in the second-grade world. Just as the evil God finished talking, he launched another round of attacks on Zen. The once gentle purple energy began to charge at Zen again. While this was happening, the downgrader made his move quickly. The scope of the second grade world was different from those of the other worlds. The spiritual sense in the second grade world reached about 30 billion times further than it would in the third grade world. Even more, the range of movement in the second grade world was 30 billion times larger than that of the third grade world. The downgrader wanted to find Clarence, so he quickly spread out his spiritual sense. After spatial transference, he released his spiritual sense. After another spatial transference, he released his spiritual sense for the second time. In just a short period, the downgrader had already moved far from where he was. His spiritual sense had already swept through a large area. Lines, lines, lines. There are lines everywhere. The flower blossoming in the fourth grade world has actually been preserved very well. It's a shame that only I can see and appreciate it, he said to himself. Even after crossing such a long distance, the downgrader still couldn't find Clarence. He became more and more frustrated. Buzz. He used the spatial transference again, but only this time, he felt an energy wave back. Although the energy wave was very weak, it was active. Those low-level worms couldn't have released this. That would be impossible, the downgrader thought to himself. That direction, he said, going on. After feeling the small clue, the downgrader used the spatial transference over and over again. Each time he used the spatial transference, he felt the energy wave becoming stronger and stronger. Could it be? Could this energy wave be coming from Clarence? If it is, what is he doing? No threat in the second grade world would need such energy. The downgrader said in confusion. After using the spatial transference hundreds of times, he reached the area where Zen and the evil god were battling each other. As he stepped foot within the area, Zen and the evil god immediately sensed his presence. Although the downgrader's form had changed a lot, they could still tell it was him by his aura. Buzz. A thin, purple line appeared in front of the downgrader. He used his spiritual sense to check what it was. He discovered it was a huge sea of energy. In its center was a human-shaped creature. This only made the downgrader even more confused. Was this Clarence? Did he morph into a human form? From what the downgrader remembered about Clarence, Clarence didn't like the human form, but the sea of energy was made by him. What was it for? As the downgrader was thinking about this, the space behind him began to fluctuate. After a few seconds, from it appeared a powerful bug with sharp spikes. Stay where you are. Don't you even dare move, the bug said through its spiritual sense. When the downgrader heard the bug's voice, he felt a shiver run up his spine. The bug was none other than the evil god. How is this even possible? How is he here? Only Clarence and I could survive the wall world, he thought to himself. How did you even survive? The downgrader asked in disbelief. However, the evil god didn't say anything. Instead, he stabbed his sharp spikes into the downgrader. The spikes, turbulent flames pierced through the downgrader's body, causing an intense burning sensation to spread through it. The downgrader's body was huge and broad, but in the blink of an eye, it burned into ashes. When the evil god was in the third grade world, he didn't take the downgrader seriously. The same went for the second grade world. Right after he killed the downgrader, he turned around and continued to attack Zen. In the wall world's black light emerged the downgrader, who was able to come out of the evil god's attack reborn, although ashen. He was furious. He couldn't accept that the evil god had escaped his downgrading. This is a humiliation. A great humiliation. The wall world couldn't kill them. What about the world of nothingness? He thought to himself. The first grade world of nothingness was very special. It had everything, but at the same time, it had nothing. Even the downgrader couldn't understand how this worked, but he was sure that the evil god wouldn't have been able to survive it. In a burning rage, the downgrader's mental state began to decline. Begin to downgrade. In the world of nothingness, nothing can exist. You are not the exception. You cannot survive, the downgrader thought resentfully. The wall world shook gradually until it started to shrink from the edge to the center. The black light in the center of the world transformed into a vortex, pulling everything from the world down to its dark core. Zen and the evil god, who were still attacking each other, felt a great traction force, making them pause their fight. Both Zen and the energy sea became distorted. He and the evil god were unable to resist the traction force happening in the wall world. What's happening? Zen asked worriedly. It's Maskma. He's begun a new round of downgrading, Clarence answered. A new round of downgrading? Zen said, stunned by what was happening. Yes, Maskma must have been very furious with you two to have done this. This time, we will be entering the world of nothingness, Clarence continued. That will be his final destination. Chapter 3909, The Point of Origin. Once the traction force appeared, the evil god did not launch another attack on Zen. He had just killed the downgrader yet again, and he faintly guessed that this traction force somehow originated from the downgrader. He and Zen stood on the edge of the wall world, and they passively gravitated towards the center. What would they find in the interior of the world of nothingness? Neither Clarence nor Mastma had a clear comprehension of it. Since the perfect land had been downgraded, the two of them could accurately predict each lower-grade world. To downgrade, he only needed to extract some details from those worlds, and there were some rules to follow. It was by following these rules that the evil god had successfully restored the energy step by step. The more details that were extracted, the less would be left. Very few details remained in the third-grade lower extreme world, but at least it could still sustain life. However, in the wall world, there were so few details remaining that nothing could live there at all. According to the rules, the details of the first-grade world had been completely extracted, so it created an absolute void, and it couldn't even accommodate souls. This was why it was called the world of nothingness. After hearing Clarence's explanation in his mind, Zen asked, "Can you survive within the world of nothingness?" "I don't think so, but the world may not be exactly as I have theorized," answered Clarence. "We'll see soon enough," Zen said calmly. After all, he had already experienced the downgrading once. Staying in the wall world left him feeling uncomfortable. It might be better to travel to the world of nothingness. Compared to the grand way in which the third, fourth, and fifth grade worlds were downgraded, the downgrading process of the wall world had occurred in an extremely quiet and peaceful way. After all, there was no sound in this place. The materials that were placed within the wall world began to gather and compress, bit by bit. They were pressed together proportionally. The distance between Zen and the evil god was 30 miles. When the distance became shortened by half, the wall world had also proportionally shrunk by half. The speed at which the wall world's downgrading happened far exceeded those of the third, fourth, and fifth grade worlds. Within 5 minutes, the distance between Zen and the evil god shrank to only 7.5 miles. By then, only 1/4 of the wall world was left. As the materials within the wall world were pressed together, so were Zen and the evil god. Although these materials had been crushed and reduced in size, they still contained strength. To Zen and the evil god, the strength of ordinary materials was nothing, and naturally it had no effect on the two of them. However, the downgrading of the wall world was accelerating, and the speed of its shrinking was also accelerating. Another 5 minutes later, only a distance of 150 feet was left between Zen and the evil god. The wall world shrank to 1/300th. The materials compressed tightly, but Zen and the evil god could still easily withstand the pressure. Another 5 minutes slipped away. It had shrunk to 1/30,000th its normal size now. Zen and the evil god were now in a close proximity to each other. The evil god shifted a little, pushing away the tightly squeezed materials that surrounded him, and he moved in the direction of Zen's spikes. The two of them no longer had any intention of continuing their fight, and they were only hoping that they could finish the last journey with a tacit understanding. The wall world had further shrunk to 1/300,000th now. The materials in this world were now densely compressed. The extreme pressure changed the nature of these materials, and the temperature rose rapidly. "Can you withstand in such a form?" the evil god suddenly questioned Zen. Zen replied with an indifferent shrug, "You'd better keep your concern for yourself." As the pressure increased exponentially, Zen drew on the surrounding energy to fortify himself. Soon, the wall world shrank to 1/30 millionth, and the pressure increased yet another 100-fold. Cracks began to form on the surface of Zen's body, from which tiny fragments sifted down, only to instantly melt. The temperature of the wall world had increased explosively. Like Zen, the evil god's body was almost imperceptibly collapsing. However, given that they had the aid of infinite energy, the two of them were not too concerned about their physical bodies. Never mind the cracks on their bodies, even if they were reduced to ashes, they could instantly heal themselves. When the wall world shrank to 1/300 millionth, the pressure increased by another factor of 10. The materials of the wall world were undergoing a strange change. Originally, while the properties of these materials had changed, they had still maintained their original colors. Now, all of them had turned a grayish-brown, the same uniform color as the gray soil. Now, Zen and the evil god were finally entering the area covered by the spiritual sense of the downgrader. He had been waiting at the center of the wall world. When he sensed the two of them, he immediately and excitedly projected his spiritual sense, saying, "Finally, you are here. I'm wondering how you will feel when you are crushed into pieces." This amount of pressure is hardly enough, replied Zen. Ha ha, the downgrader laughed merrily. The process of downgrading is the procedure of pressure becoming infinite. I wonder if your infinite energy can resist the infinite pressure. I'll now watch you being crushed bit by bit. While he was speaking, a sharpened spike shot towards him. Even in this world of high pressure and high temperature, the spike could still travel at an incredible velocity, and it instantly impaled the downgrader, who was in the black light. Bang! The flames loaded within the spike exploded and quickly engulfed the downgrader. Ah! The downgrader let rip with a painful scream. He was killed yet again by the evil god. It's really rare to meet such a loquacious good-for-nothing. As the evil god responded, he turned around and pointed the next sharpened spike at the black light, ready to slay the reborn downgrader at any time. Perhaps he feared being killed by the evil god again, or perhaps he felt afraid of the pain that came before death. For the first time, the downgrader was silent upon his rebirth. He watched the downgrading process with a muted expression. The world shrank to 1/3 billionth now. Under the extreme pressure, Zen's body collapsed from the outside to the inside. His body couldn't maintain its shape, and it was quickly assimilated into the outside world. Zen acted quickly, abandoning the outermost layer of his body and creating a slightly smaller body inside. But as the slightly smaller body couldn't withstand the pressure, he quickly created a third body. The methods the evil god used were almost the same as Zen's. The newly created bodies resembled the layers of an onion. Their bodies were shrinking smaller and smaller, and therefore, the pressure they could withstand was greater and greater. But this was only a delay tactic. When the world shrank to 1/30 billionth, the pressure increased another 10 times. The bodies of Zen and the evil god had both shrunk to the size of a silk bean. Under such immense pressure, they couldn't even release their spiritual senses. The two of them were confined to a space the size of a silk bean, and they struggled to hold on. The world shrank to 1/300 billionth. Under this massive pressure, there was no material that could maintain a stable state. All the materials had been transformed into pure energy. Zen and the evil god were no exception to this. Their bodies turned into energy, and then they gravitated towards the center of the wall world. There existed an unknown point of origin, which was the root of the world of nothingness. The point of origin was available to all. 1/3 trillionth, 1/30 trillionth, 1/300 trillionth. In the end, everything within the wall world was completely devoured and consumed by the point of origin, including both the black light and the downgrader within it. Chapter 3910, Split. One's body was the carrier of the soul, while the soul was the carrier of the consciousness. If one's body was destroyed, his or her fragile soul would then be exposed to enemy attacks, leading to his or her immediate annihilation. As the soul vanished, so would the consciousness contained in it. Even if one reached the holy soul realm, the eternal realm, or even if they became creatures of the higher grade worlds, this rule would still apply. Throughout the entire world, Clarence and Mastma were the only ones who escaped this restriction. Even if their bodies and souls were damaged, their consciousness remained intact. However, right now, Zen and the evil god had also reached their status and became their equals. All of them were now at the point of origin, where the concept of space and time did not exist. Everything had been compressed into an infinitely small point. The pressure was crushing, and no living beings could possibly survive under such harsh circumstances. However, the downgrader was surprised as he discovered that his consciousness still remained. Ha ha, I did it, I survived it all. Now, I am the ultimate winner and the only ruler of this world. For a while, the downgrader thought that he was the only one who survived. He was ecstatic as he assumed that he had finally achieved his ultimate goal. He had downgraded the entire world to the world of nothingness, but his consciousness carried on. With that, he thought that the world was now his belonging, including all substances and energy within it. At this infinitesimal point, everything felt so crowded, including his own consciousness. He tried to sense his surrounding environment, although technically, the concept of surroundings did not exist at the point of origin because everything had been integrated into a single point. But the moment he sensed his surroundings, he immediately realized that there was a familiar aura near him. In fact, it was attached to him. Clarence, why are you still alive? The downgrader was extremely shocked as he recognized that he wasn't alone. Why are you so surprised? Clarence asked calmly as if he already knew all along. What? The downgrader couldn't be more astonished at this turn of events. All this time, he thought that he was the only existence at this narrow point of origin, but it turned out that Clarence had also survived along with him. Moreover, it was as if the two of them had become a part of a whole. Furthermore, as the downgrader was still recovering from the shock of finding out that he was actually with Clarence, he suddenly discovered that there were 2 more auras around them. After carefully sensing where these auras belonged to, he was even more flabbergasted. What the hell? How could this be? Why didn't you die? Zen and the evil god didn't respond as the downgrader addressed them. At this point, all 4 of them had clearly sensed each other's aura. They found out that the 4 of them coexisted in this cramped point: the downgrader, Clarence, the evil god, and Zen. This was actually a rather abnormal and extremely dangerous situation. All of them, except the downgrader, had partially realized their coexistence much earlier, but they didn't utter a word. Then, soon after, the downgrader finally recognized the situation they were in. Clarence had kept quiet for a reason. It was because he began to merge with the downgrader. To be exact, he began to devour the downgrader's consciousness without him realizing it. The existence of the source light in the higher grade worlds had made it impossible for Clarence to subdue Mastma. However, now that the source light had dissipated since everything was reduced to the point of origin, Mastma had just lost his life-saving straw. The moment Clarence made his move earlier, Zen and the evil god also followed suit. They had been on full alert against each other since the beginning. At this infinitesimal point of origin, nobody had any room for retreat. They had no other option but to merge and devour each other in order to prevail. It was crucially important for each of them to dominate this process. Swoosh! The moment Zen started merging with the evil god's consciousness, a broad world of memories unfolded in his mind. All of the past memories of the evil god were completely revealed to him. From the evil god's birth in his inner world, to his journey in the source world, his acquaintance with Shira, his involvement with the Black Ship, and his cruel slaughter on the other shore. No detail was spared and nothing remained a secret. On the other hand, the same thing happened as the evil god attempted to merge with Zen's consciousness. All of Zen's past experiences were displayed before the evil god's eyes. The entirety of his long journey from the eastern region to the source world played out like a tremendously long film. Damn, there's too many. If I want to fuse with Zen's consciousness and absorb him, I have to take in all of his memories. The evil god thought as he began to panic. He's also taking in all of my memories. If he finished more quickly, I would be replaced by him instead. Deeming a strong sense of urgency within the evil god's consciousness, he began to go through Zen's memories like crazy. Obviously, Zen had also realized how he could overcome the evil god. He would have to take all of the evil god's memories as his own, as fast as he could. But when he continued to do so, he was briefly stopped by a surprising fact. He found out that he already possessed most of the memories from the earlier life of the evil god. He even shared some memories of the evil god exploring the source world after leaving his inner world. This was because he had once subdued the evil god after he rebelled against him. After all, the evil god was a creature from his inner world, and he was omniscient in everything when it came to it. In fact, he had once invaded the memories of the evil god's earlier life so that he would be able to deal with him. Therefore, since he already saw the majority of the evil god's memories, it didn't take him much time to completely assimilate all of them. On the other hand, although the evil god was trying hard to take in Zen's memories, he fell behind quickly because he had never pried into Zen's memories before. Besides, even when they shared the broken source world as the primitive land, the omniscient power possessed by the evil god didn't enable him to probe into Zen's mind. Soon enough, their gap just grew larger with every passing second. In fact, when the evil god took in about half of Zen's memories, Zen had almost completely absorbed all of the evil god's memories. Suddenly, the evil god felt a sense of loss in his mind. It was as if he began losing his memories. Slowly but steadily, he could no longer recall his past, his loved ones, his formidable power, and finally, even his own self. No, this can't be. I won't be defeated. Never. As the evil god began to completely lose his self, his consciousness shook intensely. He never thought that after all that he had been through, he would lose to Zen this way. However, he had lost the fight of acquiring memories right from the beginning. No matter how intelligent he was, this was something that he could not overcome by mere strategies. Anger, resentment, and agony. These were his remaining emotions as his consciousness fleeted little by little. Then, after a while, his consciousness just suddenly ended as if it never existed. At the same time, what emerged in place of it was Zen's consciousness. Right from this moment, he was Zen and also the evil god. Under the influence of the evil god's memories, Zen's aura had slightly changed. It was laced with a trace of evil. However, his personality remained the same, it was all Zen. Are you done too? Zen asked Clarence, who was also supposed to be in a battle for memories against the downgrader. He knew that Clarence and Mastma had also been aggressively devouring each other's consciousness. Earlier, he was still a little doubtful of the possible outcome of their battle. However, as he recalled the process of how he devoured the evil god's consciousness, he grew confident that Clarence could clearly handle it with ease. This was because he knew that Clarence had been living in isolation in the perfect land for countless years. Clarence's existence was several times longer compared to that of Mastma. Thus, it would be impossible for Mastma to complete the process before Clarence did. After a while, Clarence replied in a soft voice, "Mastma, he has finally returned to me now. We've become one again." "That's good to hear then," Zen said gladly. "I see that you've also overcome him," Clarence remarked as he sensed a trace of the evil god from Zen's aura. "Yes. So, what now? Is it necessary for us to merge ourselves too?" Zen asked with a hint of hesitation. He clearly knew that if they tried to devour each other's consciousness, then he would definitely lose. Compared to Clarence's seemingly infinite span of life, Zen's would look like just a second. "If I wanted to merge with you, then why would I have to make the perfect land like this?" Clarence said with a positive tone. He regarded Zen as a solver, thus it was meaningless for him to devour Zen. "What happens after this?" Zen asked out of curiosity. "Well, just wait for a while," Clarence replied. However, at this point, there was no light, no space, nor distance at the point of origin. There was also no concept of time. So, Zen just fell silent and waited just as Clarence told him. Since time didn't exist, it was hard to grasp if a lot of time had already passed or if it was just a few seconds. As they fell silent, it felt like a short moment had passed, but it also felt like it had already been several years. Then, all of a sudden, Zen sensed a gap appearing before him. He thought that it should be just an illusion since neither physical body nor soul existed here. Their consciousness was the only thing left. Thus, how could he be physically aware of this gap? For him, it was such an incredible sensation. "Did you feel it?" This time, he heard that it was Clarence's physical voice that was asking. "Yes. What is this?" Zen replied. "It's the point of origin. It is beginning to split," Clarence answered in what seemed like a riddle to Zen. Chapter 3911, The Reality Zen Wanted. Clarence had formulated several conjectures regarding the possible changes of the point of origin. It might never change and continue on forever. In that scenario, the entire world had completely perished while Clarence and Zen remained trapped in an eternal prison. Another possibility was that the point of origin would turn into the perfect land and restart the 13th grade world. Since the 1st grade and the 13th grade worlds shared a common origin, it was highly possible for them to transform into each other. The third and final possibility Clarence speculated of was that Zen's and the evil god's existences would bring about new, unexpected changes to the very basic rules of this world. In the end though, these all remained as speculations since this was the very first time Clarence experienced the downgrade. However, seeing where things now stood, it seemed his third theory proved correct as the point of origin began to split slowly. "What will happen next?" Zen asked. "Maybe, we will both have a perfect land," Clarence replied. "You mean the world will completely separate in two?" "Yes, and you will become another me." "Congratulations," Clarence told him with full sincerity. Instead of elation, Zen felt disappointed. "But you promised to give me a real world." He growled. He did not want a perfect land nor did he wish to become the ruler of the world. The only thing he wanted was to restore everything that had been destroyed. His loved ones, his friends, and his family. "It wouldn't be difficult. I can give you my memories and you will be able to repeat the past," Clarence assured him. With that, his consciousness suddenly surged towards Zen's and took the initiative to fuse with it. In this fusion, Clarence voluntarily gave up dominance, which meant that Zen now would effectively devour a part of his consciousness and have ownership of his memories. Why did you do that?" Zen asked in shock. "Once the point of origin is restored to the perfect land, I will embrace a brand new world. I have no need to restore the past, so it would be best to leave my past memories to you," Clarence answered. In truth, he only wanted to remember the general information of the past. With his reasoning, Zen found no need to say anything more and simply waited for their consciousness to merge completely. During the process, Zen found his knowledge increase exponentially. Clarence's memories contained the highest level of omniscience, the distribution of any and all energy and substance in the 13th grade world to the 1st grade world. Needless to say, it was an infinite quantity of information. With this, Zen would now be able to restore everything according to the past. Soon enough, the divided part of Clarence's consciousness completely merged with Zen's. Further on, the point of origin finally split into two with Zen and Clarence occupying their respective worlds. Once he assumed control of the point of origin, Zen completely lost contact with Clarence. The world Zen was in was infinitely small and his consciousness floated silently, alone with no source of sound, light, or feelings. It was at that moment that Zen truly felt lonely. Bored out of his mind, he then decided to start sifting over Clarence's memories. Within these memories, Zen was able to lay out every single detail of every single being that ever existed: kings, traitors, dreamers. Their life stories and inner thoughts were shown to him from birth until death, like overly long movies of which Zen was the only audience. After scrolling through the memories of tens of thousands of creatures, the point of origin suddenly began to change. Zen felt it. The sudden disappearance of the infinitely large pressure that once engulfed him. Soon enough, highly compressed substances and energy began to bounce back and the infinitely small point of origin popped. It was a silent explosion. In the midst of the violent surge of energy, there was no sound. It was in this soundless burst that the space which allowed all substances to exist came into being. The flow of time resumed. Light spread out to every corner. Finally, sound came after such a long period of silence. What was supposed to be a noisy explosion became music to Zen's ears. Before him was a huge space. There was nothing in front of him, but he did not feel empty. Instead, everything felt perfect. It was indeed the perfect land. He had already witnessed it once in Clarence's memories and it was exactly as it appeared there. Everything in this land was constant and would last forever. There would be no more pain, separation, or betrayal. If he rebuilt the fairy palace here, then everything would be perfect. With that, he then began to extract the relevant information from his memories that would enable him to rebuild his perfect world. Clatter. Cyan rocks began to materialize into the void as they formed a high wall. In an instant, the fairy palace had been restored along with the people who lived in it. Salome's lively giggles, Jeffrey's mischievous yell, and even Letitia's scolding voice, Zen could hear it all. The familiar warmth and vitality rushed through him before he even entered. Everything was perfect, simply, truly perfect. He shaped his body and walked straight into the fairy palace. However, just as he was about to enter its gates, he stopped. For some reason, he found it hard to go inside. The fairy palace was the same fairy palace from his memories and the people within it were as he remembered them to be. Everything was perfect and eternal in the perfect land. However, this perfection disgusted him. This was not the reality he wanted. Go, Zen ordered softly. And thus, the fairy palace crumbled along with the people within it. It wasn't just the fairy palace that he wanted to restore but the entire world. His world wasn't perfect by any means. It was a world where disease, separation, death, and fear existed. Nonetheless, that was reality and it could never compare to this fake world he was given. To Zen, everything in the perfect land was just too false and strange. This place is too narrow. I have to downgrade it. While Zen grumbled, the 13th grade world began to unfold. As it lost a portion of its details, it turned into the 12th grade world and the energy was divided into two. Thus, Zen proceeded with his downgrade and soon the world changed into the 11th grade world and the energy quadrupled. Soon, the world devolved into the 10th grade world and the energy split into 8. The 9th grade world, the 8th grade world, the 7th grade world, the 6th grade world, the 5th grade world. At that point, Zen finally stopped. He could restore everything at any point. In a sense, he was the controller of time and he had to decide when to restart the past. After thinking for a while, Zen finally made his decision. Above him was indestructible gray soil. It was here that his family and friends in the fairy palace were forced to bid farewell to each other and meet their ends. My memories. Restore them all. Under his command, the fairy palace was recreated in an instant. At this moment, the people within the fairy palace were all geared up to embrace their deaths. All of them suppressed their sadness under a calm and composed facade. Margaret covered Salome's eyes with her hands, not willing to let her see their doom. With no idea of what was happening, Salome innocently asked her mother what was wrong. Nothing. Everything will be fine, sweetheart, she replied and tried her best to hold back her tears. Mother, the blue line is gone, Salome continued as she looked through her mother's fingers with innocent eyes. Margaret's eyes, which had been shut close from despair, snapped open the moment she heard Salome's words. True to what her daughter said, the blue line had indeed disappeared and everyone within the fairy palace was completely unharmed. Zen's avatar, however, had disappeared. Why? What happened? How did we survive that? Margaret muttered in confusion. It wasn't just her. Letitia, Aura, Lavender, and everyone else thought the same thing. They all survived, yet Zen's avatars had all disappeared. In the other side of the fairy palace, Fuxie, Jeffrey, Rocher, and the others had all closed their eyes and awaited death. After a while though, they realized that the end they had been waiting for never came. Is this a miracle? Am I dreaming? Jeffrey had been praying with his eyes closed. He had no idea just how they would be able to escape their situation, so all he could do was pray to some higher being for a miracle. In a strange stroke of fate, his prayers were answered. Chapter 3912, Restore Everything. Fuxie, Rocher, Hilario, and the others looked at each other. It was hard for them to believe that they were still alive. The snake goddess' eyes were full of doubt. She looked into the distance and said with a trembling voice, "Has the wall world disappeared?" "No, have all the things in the world disappeared?" The space outside the fairy palace was empty. There was nothing left. This was not normal. They didn't even think this was possible. When downgrading happened, it would destroy everything in the physical realm, but its energy and materials would remain. They would not even be lost in the slightest. But now, even the wall world had disappeared. The snake goddess looked around and asked, "Where is Zen? Is Zen missing?" When the others heard her say this, they all quickly began to search for Zen. He, however, was nowhere to be found. Wait, is this Zen's Thurgy? Did he save the fairy palace? But how could he have done it? That's almost impossible. How could he have stopped the downgrading? They all made their guesses on how Zen disappeared or where Zen had gone, but at the end of the day, they were dumbfounded. They had no true clue where he was. Buzz. While everyone continued to search for him or speculate on his disappearance, his figure began to condense in the fairy palace. Dad, Zen, what happened? Did you stop the downgrading? Jeffrey, Rocher, the snake goddess, Mike, and the others ran to him immediately. They had never heard of or encountered a situation like this before. What was happening was truly incomprehensible to them. Zen looked at them with a trace of warmth flowing from the bottom of his heart. No, I didn't stop the downgrading. The downgrading has been completed. The downgrading has been completed. Jeffrey looked puzzled, but how could it have been completed? We're not dead. The snake goddess raised her eyebrows and said, Zen, have we died already? Have we just managed to come back to life again? Zen gave the snake goddess a thumbs up. You're right, he said. Are we in the underworld? Jeffrey asked, his eyes wide open in shock. Zen reached his hand out and gently stroked Jeffrey's body. When he did this, Jeffrey's tall body shrank back to its normal size. He rubbed Jeffrey's head and smiled. Son, there is no underworld in this world. This is a brand new world. I recreated you all with the help of Clarence's memories. Jeffrey blinked his eyes in disbelief. He quickly looked down at his body. I was created with memories. Does that mean I'm fake? Am I not the real Jeffrey anymore, Dad? Ha ha, Zen laughed, amused by his son's words. The others, however, didn't laugh with him. The truth was they also had the same worry in their hearts. To be fair, Zen also had this worry in him before. He was also afraid he was just in an illusory world. Everyone, don't worry, Zen sighed, trying to comfort them. He began to explain it in detail. When the energy is arranged according to the original pattern, the substance it forms is the same as the past one. This is an absolute reality. If ice melted but condensed back again into ice, wouldn't it still be the ice it was before? The snake goddess was the first to understand. Do you mean to say that we did die, but since you have all the memories of the whole world, you were able to restore us using those memories? Yes, Zen nodded. But why is it that you could only restore the fairy palace? The snake goddess asked. Well, that's not true. I can restore everything to its original state with the help of the memories, and I'll do it soon. Zen assured them. With a gentle wave of his hand, the black ship, which was not far from the fairy palace, was restored. The Grand Master of Heaven, Shira, the former captain, and Edna were also reborn with it. We're alive. Why? How? Where is the evil god? The 4 people on the black ship were also confused. They were all safe, but they were still a bit worried. The evil god was nowhere to be found. They saw Zen, but no one dared to ask him. Edna, however, summoned up all her courage and flew out. At the entrance of the fairy palace, she timidly asked Zen, Creator, where is the evil god? The evil god, Zen replied, an undetectable expression on his face. He's dead. What? The evil god's dead? She tried to clarify. Zen nodded his head. Her mouth was hung open, and a trace of sadness appeared in her eyes. She spoke to Zen once again, but why? Why aren't we dead? I created you, answered Zen. It was difficult for others to understand Zen's creation of realities, but since Edna was born in his inner world, she was well aware of his omnipotent ability. She thought it was normal for him to directly create her. When she heard this, her eyes lit up with hope. If you created me and the others, can you create the evil god? No, Zen said, shutting down Edna's hope immediately. The evil god had already comprehended infinite energy. If Zen were to create him, it would bring about endless trouble. Who knew what the evil god would do? It would be too difficult to deal with him, especially considering he was just as strong as Zen. As Zen refused her request, Edna's eyelids trembled slightly. She did her best not to cry. Pursing her lips, she nodded and said, I see. Thank you, Creator. She turned around, ready to return to the black ship. Zen thought he would be definite with his decision, but when he looked at Edna, an inexplicable emotion rose in his heart. It felt like a mixture of depression and desperation. It was as if something from within him was begging him to change his mind. However, even though the emotion came from him, he was not sure if it belonged to him. When the evil god's consciousness fused with his, their emotions also mixed. The evil god's emotions could affect Zen's. The evil god was begging him to bring him back to life. Or was he begging himself? Zen shook his head in disagreement but then began to give in. He called out to Edna, smiling bitterly. Wait, he said. Edna turned around and stared at Zen in a daze. I will create the evil god, but not for now, said Zen. It wasn't difficult to erase part of the memories of the evil god and completely restrict him, but Zen decided to deal with this in the future. Hearing this, Edna flew into the air and kowtowed 3 times towards Zen to show her happiness and thankfulness. She then returned to the black ship. Zen gently waved his hand, signaling to the black ship that he was allowing them to follow the fairy palace. When the fairy palace and the black ship passed somewhere, the energy hidden in the void would begin to fluctuate. Zen restored the deep space's golden ring-shaped sun. Broken tiles floating in the air, huge broken buildings, and the sky wheel city were also restored. When the fairy palace went down, the huge strata floating in the void had also been restored. The different races living in the deep space had also been reborn. These uncivilized races were not aware of when they died or when they had been reborn. They didn't even know about the downgrading that happened. Their peaceful lives had not been broken. Among them, the only one who knew about what had happened was Elder Shui. He calmly waited for his death in the elemental race's territory and then he was reborn. He was very puzzled by what happened. When he saw the fairy palace coming, he became even more confused. Zen greeted him with a smile before inviting him to hop on board. Why, and what happened? Elder Shui wanted an answer. Hilario will give you an answer, Zen replied shortly. There were still many people and places Zen had to restore. He didn't have the time to explain the situation again and again. After restoring the deep space, he took the fairy palace and the black ship back to the 4th grade world. In the empty world, the earth, mountains, rivers, the 4 pillars, the eternal divine courtyard, and the broken secondary worlds were all restored. Not long after, the fairy palace and the black ship arrived at the entrance of the chaos. The human spirit King Kincaid died there, so he would also be reborn here. Kincaid's memory stopped the moment he rushed out of the chaos. When he revived, he had an unreadable expression on his face. He did not know how to react. Like before, Zen asked Hilario to explain to him what had happened. After that, he drove the fairy palace into the chaos. Chapter 3913, The End. The chaos remained empty, save for the fairy palace and the black ship. Restoring a secondary world was a simple matter for Zen, but he needed to maintain order and decide what to revive and what no longer needed to be revived. The Pear Hill, splash, loose earth and rubble gathered back together into boulders and land forms. Trees and plants sprouted from the soil and grew rapidly. Buildings rose from the ground until entire cities were made whole again. The human race, the snake goddess race, all manner of creatures, great and small, were resurrected in a flash. The Pear Hill had been destroyed not by the downgrading, but because of the erosion of the extreme form energies and the invasion of the troubled creatures from the burial land. The newly revived creatures were thus still so gripped by fear of the already vanquished troubled creatures that they just milled around warily. Zen nodded to the snake goddess. It's your turn, he said. Okay. The snake goddess eyes lit up. The Pear Hill meant everything to her. She had been devastated to see it destroyed. But now it had been revived, so had her zest for life. Whoosh! In a flash, the snake goddess stood on the jadeite platform. My dear people, the worst is over for the Pear Hill. The people in the Pear Hill were unaware of what had happened, but they began to realize that the troubled creatures had disappeared. The snake goddess words were the final assurance to put them at ease. What happened next still left them too dumbfounded to celebrate, however. Source world, restore. Zen had revived the source world, and the Pear Hill was returned to its original place in it. The inhabitants of the Pear Hill gasped as a blue cover reappeared in the clear sky above them. Are we back in the source world? Oh, my God, I can't believe it. It must be a miracle. Zen had chosen to bring everything back to the way it was after the evil god had killed the yellow Thirkin, the divine farmer. The source world and its countless creatures now continued on with existence as if nothing had changed. The divine land, restore. The ruin graveyard, restore. The other shore, restore. The chaos, restore. The chaotic energy, restore. The 6 chaos ancient gods, restore. Zen brought everything back in quick succession. He recognized that even the chaos and the chaotic energy played an important role in the ecosystem of the world. Zen, however, saw no need to bring back the burial land, the downgrader, or the snake spirit king. They were better off in oblivion. Zen waved his hand, recreating the bodies of the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord, Zia, the real Snake Goddess, the real Fuxi, Eastern Emperor Tai, Zhurong, Gonggong, and the real Emperor Charm, then infusing them with their energy souls. They materialized in the fairy palace. Then Zen proceeded to bring back Chiyu and the 9 Li race. Even restoring people from different eras like that proved no difficulty for him. People were shell-shocked upon resurrection. Zia, for one, clearly remembered dying in the 4th grade world. Now, he suddenly found himself in the fairy palace. Everyone was caught in a state of bewilderment. It took some time before it finally sank in, and for the joyful revelries to begin. It was 3 days before Zen could hold a banquet in the fairy palace. Nearly 1,000 people showed up to join the celebrations. Among them were Yasmin and Flamen, who busied themselves all throughout dinner playing matchmaker for Zen. Hence, 3 months later, a grand wedding banquet was held in the Bloom Divine province of the Source World. Dignitaries from the various provinces traveled thousands of miles from across the Source World to attend. Nearly 100,000 people witnessed the momentous occasion. 3 years later, Zen had 6 new children, 3 boys and 3 girls. Life was good and completely at peace for the next 3 decades. One day, Zen was at the top of the deep space. He stared thoughtfully at the gray soil before him, hands behind his back. In the past 30 years, he had studied the gray soil closely. Based on his memories, Clarence had done the same before. Zen, like any other human, had an infinite desire for knowledge. He hadn't understood before why Clarence had created Maskma, but now he had. For Clarence, there was no difference between the world of nothingness and the perfect land. If there was no choice or challenge to freedom, it just started to feel like a boundless imprisonment. In the past 30 years, there had been no limits to what Zen and his loved ones could pursue. However, none of these pursuits made him feel fulfilled. He spent more and more time on the gray soil, searching for something he could not quite understand. The search had proved futile so far. Zen sighed. He sat cross-legged in the air, hovering in deep thought over the gray soil. It was then that he noticed a thin black crack over the earth. Zen's eyes widened. He floated hurriedly down to the crack. The crack couldn't have just appeared naturally. The gray soil was rock hard and didn't easily break. As Zen came closer, he realized there was a dark green liquid seeping out of the crack. Zen reached out his hand. The moment his fingers made contact with the liquid, Clarence's voice rang out in his mind. I have left the perfect land, Zen. I knew you would be curious about the world outside the perfect land eventually, so I left this message for you through the liquid, the only thing that can penetrate the gray soil. I couldn't find where the black soil ends, but I did find an underground cave of unknown depths. By the time you receive the message, I would have already left through this secret passage. If you also ever want to leave the perfect land, the only way out for you is to turn to the evil god. The message ended there. The dark green liquid quickly solidified and turned into ashes. The black crack quickly closed and disappeared, as if it had never been there. Zen mulled over what Clarence had said. The evil god, huh? Zen murmured to himself. He disappeared from the spot, reappearing the next moment at the hillside of the Pear Hill. In a clearing in the forest stood a simple thatched hut. This had been Edna's residence for the last 30 years. All this time, she had just been waiting for the Creator to fulfill his promise of reviving the evil god. She had never thought to pressure Zen, however. She chose to wait patiently. She could wait for endless years. Edna was startled to see Zen, but the surprise on her face soon gave way to a faint smile. Is it time to revive him? Zen nodded. Yes, but he's very dangerous, Edna reminded. Danger gives meaning to life, Zen replied, with a small shrug. Energy began to surge in the void. Substances began to condense. A body began to take form. A heart began beating. The man opened his eyes slowly, a knowing smirk pulling at the corners of his lips. Thanks to the user, Wizardo 37 inches for the chapters provided. 13914.